Picture this. The most feared man in Seoul, a Korean Mafia boss whose name makes grown men tremble, sits alone in a $1 million penthouse on his 35th birthday, tears streaming down his face as he stares at a faded photograph of a woman he barely remembers. Enter Amara, a 7-year-old black girl with cornrowed hair and eyes too wise for her age, who somehow wandered past his elite security. She studies him for a moment, then says words that will shatter and rebuild his entire world. "Don't cry, sir. You can borrow my mom." This is not just a story about kindness. It's about how a child's innocence can dismantle the walls built by a lifetime of pain, and how family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the souls brave enough to see past our monsters to the broken children we hide inside. Kang Min-yu hadn't celebrated a birthday in 27 years, not since the day his mother disappeared when he was 8 years old, leaving behind only a note that read, "I'm sorry," and a single photograph. Now, at 35, he ruled Seoul's underground with an iron fist. His organization controlled everything from the docks to the entertainment districts, and his name was whispered with a mixture of fear and respect. But on this particular November evening, as rain painted gray streaks across his penthouse windows, Min-yu dismissed his guards, poured himself expensive whiskey he wouldn't drink, and allowed himself the one luxury he never permitted: memory. The photograph sat on the coffee table, his mother's smile frozen in time, a smile he'd spent decades trying to understand. Why did you leave? The question haunted him like a ghost. He didn't hear the elevator ding, didn't hear the small footsteps padding across his marble floors. What he heard was a voice, high, clear, and completely unafraid. "Mister, why are you crying?" Min-yu's head snapped up, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his waist. But he froze. Standing in his living room, dripping rainwater onto his expensive rug, was a little black girl. She couldn't have been more than 7, with dark skin that glistened with rain, cornrows adorned with colorful beads, and the most direct stare he'd ever encountered. "How did you?" he began, then stopped. His security was impenetrable. This was impossible. "The door was open," she said simply, which was a lie, but somehow Min-yu didn't correct her. "I saw you from the window across the street. My mama says nobody should cry alone." She tilted her head. "Are you sad because it's your birthday?" Min-yu should have called security, should have been furious. Instead, he found himself asking, "How did you know it's my birthday?" The girl pointed to the single cupcake on the counter, something his assistant had left despite his orders, with a candle melted into the frosting unlit. "Only birthday boys have cupcakes they don't eat." She walked closer, fearless, and studied his face. Her eyes held something ancient, something that reminded him painfully of his mother. "You look like you miss somebody." The words hit him like a physical blow. Min-yu, who had ordered hits without flinching, who had built an empire on fear and strategy, felt his throat tighten. "I don't know you," he said, his voice rough. "You should go home." "But you're sad." She said it as if that trumped everything else: logic, danger, propriety. Then she said the words that would change everything. "Don't cry, sir. You can borrow my mom." Silence descended. Outside, Seoul glittered with 1,000,000 lives, but in that moment the entire world narrowed to this absurd, impossible offer. "Borrow your mom," Min-yu repeated slowly. She nodded vigorously, beads clicking. "Mama always says love gets bigger when you share it. She gives the best hugs and she makes birthday soup that tastes like sunshine. You can come meet her. She's probably worried about me anyway." She said this last part somewhat guiltily. Something cracked in Min-yu's chest, something that had been frozen for 27 years. Before he could stop himself, he laughed. It was a rusty sound, like a machine remembering how to work. "Your mother is probably calling the police right now." "Nah," the girl said confidently. "Mama doesn't trust police. We handle our own problems." She extended a tiny hand. "I'm Amara. What's your name?" "Min-yu," he said, and took her hand. It was small, warm, and completely trusting. When was the last time someone had touched him without fear? Finding where Amara lived wasn't difficult. She pointed out the window to a modest apartment building across the street. What Minyu didn't expect was the woman who answered the door after his knock, Amara's hand firmly in his. Kioma Akafor was a force of nature. She stood perhaps 5'6", with rich dark skin, natural hair pulled into a bun, and eyes that assessed him with the precision of a general evaluating battlefield conditions. She wore nursing scrubs and looked exhausted, but when she saw Amara, relief and fury warred on her face. "Amara Ngozi Akafor," she said, her Nigerian accent thick with emotion. "Do you know what you've done to my heart?" "I'm sorry, Mama," Amara said, not sounding particularly sorry. "But look, I found a birthday boy who needs us." Kioma's eyes moved to Minyu, and he saw the exact moment she recognized him. Not as Kang Minyu the man, but as the shadow that owned this neighborhood, the name people spoke carefully. Fear flickered across her face, but only for a moment. Then her jaw set, and Minyu recognized something he'd seen in mirrors, a fighter's stance. "Mr. Kang," she said evenly, "please bring my daughter inside." The apartment was small but immaculate. It smelled like spices he couldn't name and something baking. Photos covered every wall, Amara at various ages, Kioma with other black women who must be friends, scenes from a life lived fully despite obvious financial constraints. It was more home than Minyu's penthouse had ever been. "Sit," Kioma commanded, pointing to a worn couch. Minyu, who gave orders but never took them, sat. She knelt before Amara. "Baby, you cannot leave this apartment without telling me, ever. Do you understand?" "But Mama," he was crying. "I don't care if the president was crying. You tell me first." Her voice broke slightly. "You're all I have, baby girl. You're my whole world." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mama, I really am." Kioma pulled her into a fierce hug, and Minyu had to look away from the intimacy of it. When was the last time someone had held him like that? Had his mother before she left. After putting Amara to bed despite her protests, Kioma returned to the living room. She poured 2 cups of tea, strong Nigerian style, and sat across from Minyu. "Talk," she said. "About what?" "About why my daughter found you crying. About why you brought her home instead of calling security. About why you're still sitting in my living room." Minyu should have left, should have erected his walls. Instead, words poured out, words he'd never spoken aloud, about his mother's disappearance, about the birthdays spent wondering if she was alive or dead, about building an empire from pain because it was easier than feeling the abandonment. Kioma listened without judgment. When he finished, she said, "My Amara lost her father when she was 3. Brain aneurysm, here one moment, gone the next. I understand about holes that don't close." She sipped her tea. "But Mr. Kang, let me be clear. My daughter has a hero complex and the self-preservation of a honey badger. She cannot adopt every broken soul in Seoul." "I'm not asking her to." "No," Kioma raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you still here?" Minyu didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had one he didn't want to examine, because this tiny apartment felt more real than anywhere he'd been in decades. What started as an impossible moment became an improbable pattern. Minyu told himself he was just checking on them. Amara had invaded his space, so it was reasonable to ensure she didn't do it again. But checking on them became having dinner with them, which became Kioma's sharp wit over tea while Amara slept, which became something Minyu couldn't name but desperately needed. Kioma worked night shifts as a nurse, leaving Amara with elderly Mrs. Kim next door. But Mrs. Kim was unreliable and Minyu found himself offering his apartment. "Security," he said gruffly. "It's better than that building." "You want to babysit?" Kioma's skepticism was warranted. "I want to ensure she doesn't wander into traffic next time she decides to rescue someone." So began the strangest arrangement in Seoul. Korea's most dangerous man teaching a 7-year-old African girl to play jangi while her mother saved lives at the hospital. Amara was fearless with him, demanding stories, correcting his manners, insisting he try her mother's jollof rice. She treated him not as a monster, but as the lonely boy he'd once been. And Kioma challenged him in ways no one dared. She debated him on ethics, called him out on his cynicism, and refused to be impressed by his power. "Money doesn't make you interesting," she said once. "Your story does, but only if you let it make you better, not just richer." Weeks became months. Minyu found himself restructuring his operations so he could have dinner with them. Found himself laughing at Amara's stories about school, at Kioma's tales from the hospital. Found himself feeling something he thought he'd buried with his childhood: hope. But the underworld doesn't forgive softness, and Minyu's enemies were watching, waiting for weakness. The attack came on a Tuesday. Minyu was reviewing shipment routes when his phone exploded with messages. "They have the girl. They have your weakness." Terror pure and absolute consumed him. Not the calculated concern of a boss, but the raw panic of someone who had just discovered what it meant to love. He mobilized every resource, called in every favor. Within an hour, he had a location, an abandoned warehouse by the river. What his enemies didn't account for was Kioma. When she received word that Amara was taken, she didn't call police. She called Minyu, and her voice was steel wrapped in fire. "Bring me with you. She's my daughter." They moved through the night like avenging angels, Minyu with his trained men and weapons, Kioma with nothing but a mother's fury. The warehouse was guarded, but Minyu's crew was better. They cut through security with surgical precision until they reached the center room. Amara sat in a chair, bound but unharmed, staring down 3 armed men with pure defiance. "My mama's gonna be so mad at you," she was saying. "And Minyu Ajashi is going to do that thing where his voice gets really quiet, which is when you know you messed up big time." The men didn't notice Minyu and Kioma entering from opposite sides until it was too late. What happened next was a blur of violence and fury. Minyu eliminating threats with cold efficiency, while Kioma reached Amara, cutting her bonds, shielding her with her own body. When the smoke cleared, Minyu's rival, a bitter man named Park who'd wanted to take over his territory, lay disarmed on the floor. Minyu's gun was pressed to his temple, his finger tight on the trigger. One pull, that's all it would take. "Minyu Ajashi," Amara's voice cut through the blood rage. "Don't. Mama says violence just makes more violence. You're better than him." Minyu's hand shook. Every instinct screamed to pull the trigger to end the threat. But then Kioma was there, her hand on his arm. "She's right," she said softly. "You're better than this, better than him. Be the man we know you are." Slowly, Minyu lowered the gun. He looked at Park with cold contempt. "If you ever breathe in their direction again, there's no mercy. Tell everyone, Kang Minyu protects his family." The aftermath was complicated. Minyu doubled security on Kioma and Amara, moved them to a safer building, ensured they wanted for nothing. But something had shifted, not just in circumstances, but in souls. One evening, 3 months after the kidnapping, Kioma knocked on his penthouse door. Alone. "We need to talk," she said. Minyu's heart hammered. "Is Amara okay?" "Amara's fine. She's with my friend Grace." Kioma walked to his window, looking out at the Seoul skyline. "Minyu, what are we doing?" "What do you mean?" "This," she gestured between them. "You've integrated into our lives. You have dinner with us almost every night. Amara calls you Ajashi and asks for your opinion on everything. And she turned to face him, vulnerable in a way he rarely saw. "I find myself waiting to hear your key in the door, looking forward to your terrible jokes, feeling safer when you're near." Minyu's throat went dry. "Is that bad?" "It's terrifying," Kioma admitted. "Because you're still who you are. Because this life you lead, it almost killed my daughter. Because I'm falling for a man whose business card might as well read danger. I'd walk away from all of it." The words escaped before Minyu could stop them. "From every deal, every territory, everything I've built. For you, for her, for this, he struggled for words. For this feeling of being home. Kioma's eyes widened. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more. Minyu closed the distance between them. Kioma, before Amara wandered into my life, I was half dead. I'd built an empire on the graveyard of my own heart. But you too, you reminded me what it feels like to be human, to want more than power, to want family. What about your mother? Kioma asked softly. Don't you still need answers? Minyu had thought about this constantly. After the kidnapping, he'd poured resources into finding his mother, and finally he'd succeeded. She was alive, living in a small coastal town, remarried with 2 teenage children. When he'd gone to see her, she'd wept, explained that his father had been violent, that she'd fled to protect them both, that she'd been too ashamed to return when she got stable, that she'd thought of him every single day. I found her, Minyu said, and I forgave her, because you taught me that holding onto pain just makes you its prisoner. She wants to meet you both, actually. She cries every time I mention Amara. Kioma's eyes filled with tears. Minyu. I love you, he said simply. I love how you fight for your daughter, how you challenge me, how you see past the monster to the man. I love that you make the world make sense, and I love Amara like she's my own. So I'm asking, can I borrow your family, not for a day, for forever? Kioma laughed through her tears. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. I'll work on it, Minyu promised, pulling her close. I have time. Minyu's 36th birthday was different. The penthouse was filled with people. Kioma's Nigerian friends teaching his Korean associates how to make proper jollof rice. Amara conducting dance lessons for his bemused security team, his mother laughing with Kioma over wedding photos. He'd left the Mafia life, not easily, not without careful negotiation and strategic exit planning, but completely. Now he ran legitimate businesses, consulted on security, and had something he'd never imagined: peace. Amara ran up, now 8 years old and no less fierce. Minyu Appa, she called him now, father in Korean. Mama says to light your candles, and you have to make a wish. Minyu looked at Kioma, who was watching him with eyes full of love. At his mother, who'd become a constant presence in their lives. At the blended family they'd created from broken pieces. I don't need to wish, he said, pulling Amara into a hug. I have everything already. Wish anyway, Amara insisted. Wishes make the magic stronger. So Minyu closed his eyes. And this time, instead of wishing for his mother to return, or for the pain to stop, or for answers to old questions, he wished for the strength to deserve this gift. To be worthy of the 7-year-old girl who'd seen a crying stranger and offered her most precious treasure. To honor the woman who'd taught him that courage means being vulnerable. To build a life that reflected this second chance. When he opened his eyes, Amara was grinning. Good wish. The best, Minyu said. Now let's eat this cake before your mother insists we eat more jollof rice. You love Mama's jollof rice. I love everything about your mama, Minyu said, catching Kioma's eye across the room. She smiled, that brilliant smile that still made his heart stop, and mouthed, I love you too. And in that moment, surrounded by family both found and reclaimed, Kang Minyu, former Mafia boss, abandoned child, lost soul, finally felt found. But life, as Minyu had learned, never stays frozen in perfect moments. 3 months after that birthday, on a crisp February morning, Amara came home from school with tears streaming down her face. Not the tears of a scraped knee or a bad grade, but something deeper. Kioma was at the hospital, so Minyu was the one who found her curled up on the couch, her small body shaking with sobs. His heart clenched with familiar panic, the same terror he'd felt the day she was taken. He sat beside her, uncertain, this man who'd faced down armed enemies but was still learning how to comfort a crying child. Amaria, he said softly, using the Korean term of endearment. What happened? They called Mama a bad word, she choked out. Said she doesn't belong here, that I don't belong here, that we should go back to Africa. Her voice broke. But Appa, I was born here. This is my home too. Rage, white-hot and pure, flooded through Minyu. But he forced it down, forced himself to think like a father, not a fighter. He pulled Amara into his lap, something he'd been too afraid to do a year ago, too uncertain of his right to hold her. Now she curled into him naturally, her beaded cornrows tickling his chin. "Listen to me," he said, his voice steady despite the fury churning beneath. "Those people are wrong, not just wrong, they're small. Small minds, small hearts, small lives. You know what makes someone belong somewhere?" Amara shook her head against his chest. "Love," Minyu said. "Not blood, not skin color, not where your ancestors were born. Love. Your mama loves this city enough to save its people's lives every single night. You love your friends, your school, your neighborhood. And this city," his voice grew fierce, "is lucky to have you both. Anyone who can't see that is blind." "But why do they hate us?" Amara asked, her voice small. Minyu thought carefully. This was important, maybe the most important conversation he'd ever have. "Fear," he finally said. "They're afraid of anything different because different reminds them that the world is bigger than they thought, that they might not understand everything, and fear makes people mean." He tilted her face up to look at him. "But you know what's stronger than fear?" "What?" "Courage, the courage to be kind anyway, to stand tall anyway, to love anyway, like your mama does, like you did when you saw a stranger crying and offered him your most precious thing." His throat tightened. "You saved my life that day, Amara. Not because you were Korean or African or any label, because you were brave enough to see someone hurting and help. That's what matters. That's what makes you belong everywhere." Amara was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Appa, will you come to my school?" "Of course, what do you need?" "There's a parent day next week, where parents talk about their jobs." She looked up at him with those wise, ancient eyes. "Will you come? Will you tell them your story, about how you were lost and we found you? Maybe if they hear about how families can be different and still be real, they'll understand." Minyu's chest tightened. A year ago he would have refused, would have hidden behind anonymity and power. But Kioma and Amara had taught him something revolutionary. Vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the only real strength. "Yes," he said, "I'll come." The following week, Minyu stood in front of 38-year-olds and their judgmental parents, wearing a simple suit instead of his usual designer armor. He saw the whispers, the looks. Who was this Korean man with the little black girl? What was his angle? "My name is Kang Minyu," he began, "and I'm going to tell you about the day a child saved my life." He told them everything. About his mother's abandonment. About building walls so high he forgot what sunlight felt like. About crying alone on his birthday because he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve anything else. And about a 7-year-old girl with more courage in her little finger than he'd had in his entire body, who looked at a stranger and saw someone worth saving. "Amara offered to let me borrow her mother," Minyu said, his voice rough with emotion. "She didn't see a dangerous man. She didn't see someone different from her. She saw someone hurting and she did what her mother taught her. She offered love." He looked directly at the parents. "My daughter, because that's what she is now, in every way that matters, is being raised by the bravest woman I've ever met. A woman who came to a foreign country, lost her husband, and chose to build a life anyway. Who saves lives every single day at the hospital. Who taught me that family isn't about looking the same. It's about choosing each other every single day." The classroom was silent. Some parents looked moved, others looked skeptical. Minyu didn't care. He knelt beside Amara's desk and took her hand. "My daughter belongs here," he said quietly, "because she makes here better by existing in it. And anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met." Amara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were the good kind. She threw her arms around his neck and whispered, "Thank you, Appa." That evening when Kioma came home from her shift, she found Minyu and Amara asleep on the couch, Amara's head on his chest, his arm protective around her. On the coffee table was a drawing Amara had made at school, 3 stick figures holding hands, one labeled Mama, one Appa, and one me. Above them, in crayon rainbow letters, my family. Kioma picked up the drawing, tears streaming down her face. She thought about the single mother she'd been 2 years ago, struggling to make ends meet, worried constantly about giving Amara enough. She'd never imagined this impossible, beautiful family built from broken pieces and brave choices. She thought about the man sleeping on her couch, who'd walked away from an empire because a child taught him what really mattered, who faced down a classroom of judgment because his daughter needed him to be brave, who'd somehow become the father Amara deserved and the partner Kioma had stopped believing existed. Love, she'd learned, wasn't about perfect circumstances. It was about imperfect people choosing each other perfectly. She kissed Amara's forehead, then Minyu, and whispered into the quiet apartment, "Thank you for wandering into our lives, for staying, for choosing us." Minyu stirred, opened his eyes, and smiled, that rare, genuine smile he saved only for them. "Always," he murmured, "for always." And outside, Seoul continued its endless dance of lights and life, holding within its vast embrace this small, perfect family, Korean and Nigerian, and something entirely new, built not on blood but on something stronger. The revolutionary choice to love without conditions, to build family without boundaries, to prove that belonging isn't about where you're from but about who you love enough to call home. Thank you for journeying through this story of unlikely family, redemptive love, and the courage it takes to let broken souls heal together. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing our global community come together. And most importantly, what are the 3 major lessons you learned from Minyu, Chioma, and Amara's story? Share your reflections below. Did this story touch your heart? Did it make you think differently about family, redemption, or second chances? Your insights matter, and I read every comment. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more Afro-Korean stories that blend cultures, challenge hearts, and celebrate the beautiful complexity of love without borders. Until next time, remember, sometimes the family we need is the one brave enough to choose us. Red heart, black heart.